Story time! Time to start the day!
All right, yeah. So we're here for API storytelling time. It's as Aiden and I were just talking. This is kind of the highlight of our week. Looking forward to this, where we're coming together, Aiden, Mike, and I, and talking about APIs and pretty much anything. But really, this is our weekly time to kind of tell our stories, but also bring in other people's stories and get meta sometimes and talk about storytelling around storytelling. So, with that said, you want to bring Mike on, Aiden?
Yeah, so this week, this we've traded one mic for another. Our usual Mike Amundsen guest is out this week, but we are lucky to be joined by our first guest on the show, Mike Habe. And Mike is someone we both have known for a while, an engineering leader, an API enthusiast, an aspiring storyteller, and now he's working at Capital One on the Platform Services Center of Excellence team. So he will be joining any moment now to talk about a story he has from all his years in the API space and sharing that with both us and all of you listening today.
Thanks for bringing him on. I appreciate this.
Yeah. And now the cross several time zone Zoom join dance happens. Look at this. It's almost right on time.
It's like magic.
It's magic. It's technology magic. Oh, no, I have to mess with the camera.
Yeah, we want the real shot of you. There you are.
There we go. Yes, you got to get all of this in its glory here. I'm repping everything here. Make sure.
Long time no see, my friend. Nice shirt. Nice shirt.
Yes. It's been a long time. It's great to be with you. How you been?
Life is good, man. Staying busy. Got lots going on with Postman and Open API and Async API these days, and feeling good though. But every week feels like a freight train, and this is kind of like, all right, we're gonna put the brakes on the freight train for the weekend, and this is kind of the first sign that we're coming into the stop for me, this storytelling time. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a privilege to be here with you. It's a pretty cool experiment. I've been following along, and it's really fun to be able to join in and share.
Yeah.
Get that opportunity.
Last time we saw each other, we were eating pizza when the world was open together.
Yes, way back then, centuries ago, almost.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like Ken said, like this has also sort of become my end of week thing too, where you step back and then you go into the weekend with like these bigger thoughts and like sort of the zoomed out view of how all these things can fit together. So really appreciate you coming on and being our first test guest.
Always.
Test guest is not supposed to rhyme. Yeah, as a test guest is not supposed to rhyme with rest vest, but it just so happens that it does.
Lots of good rhyming to do in the API space, that's for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, it's great. It's really cool to be able to kind of jump on here and do this. Loved a lot of the topics you guys were bringing up for the last couple episodes. So this is really a great way to end the weekend to kind of keep things up on a high note. Give yourself some relaxation time.
Well, I know your backstory, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and like why APIs. Why APIs catch your attention, and why are you here telling stories about it?
Wow. APIs and service calls and network calls kind of struck me, and this is coming from somebody who played video games and all kinds of stuff for forever. But when I really got into it professionally, it just kind of struck me as magic. It connected these systems, and it made things that were distributed across the world, work. and it was kind of one of those things that I got started in services and in back end development, and then one thing led to another, and I just kind of kept getting sucked down this rabbit hole and learning about communication, how processes, organizations change, and how that's related to the technology and how it's done. It's just infinitely complex and interesting, and it just kind of keeps dragging me in. Kind of that's it. So I started as kind of a developer background, and really just kind of kept going and just kind of peeling back the onion and pulling on threads to be able to start understanding things more and more. And yeah, well, I still haven't figured it out, and I'm still trying to learn more.
Are we ever going to figure it out, Aiden? Do you think that's even possible, figuring it out?
I think as soon as we figure it out, it'll allow us to do new interesting things that will lead to other things we don't know. It's going to be one of those kind of layered problems that never quite is all the way solved.
I like that. So I hear you got some stories you want to bring our way and talk about, Mike.
Yeah.
From your space. What's on your mind?
So, wow, I mean, listening to the last couple episodes, it was really hard to kind of pick one. But you know, Ken, we met in Portland. Was it 2017? Is it that API strat?
Sounds familiar. I believe so.
Sounds
Yeah.
like that. And you know, I gave two talks there. I got the one with the hypermedia, which I'd really kind of dove into, very technical talk, and it was really kind of interesting. And then the other one that I got was really just kind of this contract first development and really not repeating yourself. But that one was really a story, and those are the kind of stories that really seem to resonate and really change a lot of people. And the big thing that I landed on is that I've done a lot of things career-wise and kind of working for a lot of different organizations, and I've done a lot of consulting and kind of had to go into environments and organizations and really pick things up quickly, and insights around what's going on. And it's been remarkable is that the more I dive into the APIs, the more I actually really kind of see them as this critical storytelling tool, not just this artifact at the end, but really this living tool to kind of really help understand these complex systems and really kind of have conversations around them.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and that's why I see the back of your shirt. Open API is really one possible vocabulary that we can use amongst all of that, you know. And so it's a shared common vocabulary that we don't all get. Some of us understand, but there's a lot of shared understanding in the space that makes this possible, I think. So
it's interesting how language takes so many different forms and how you can say the same thing in a lot of different ways. And I think I used to think in software that like you started with like the user story and you'd have to like go all these different places along the way, and then you'd end up with like working code that looked nothing like English or behavior of a system that looked nothing like English. But the more I get into it and the more, especially like being part of the API community, I realize that it's a lot more circular than that. Like the more concrete you make a system, the more conversations you can start to have about it too. And it's interesting how there's like not really one vocabulary to talk about this stuff all the way. That's the right way all the time.
Yeah, vocabulary is a really cool thing, and kind of both of you were mentioning vocabulary language, right? It's this really interesting juxtaposition of really trying to say, is this a people process? Is it a technology process? But really, it's a socio-technical process, right? And there are aspects that are technical, and there are aspects that are really people oriented, and even going so far as to being very explicit about the way that you define things when you are building either an API or a vocabulary of things. It also sparks other conversations because it kind of brings to light things that people thought they agreed on, but oh no, that's not what I meant. What I meant was this thing over here, and it's totally different. Wait, we got two things. Oh, awesome. We just created a new word or a new element in this system, right? It really just kind of sparks that and grows understanding as just kind of a natural conversation piece, like kind of meta conversations about the conversations creates an understanding about new things within the API that maybe people were looking past.
what fascinates me about that storytelling, and you mentioned the socio aspect of it, is we in the API space, I would say APIs grabbed my attention because they were very public. You know, the Twitter, the Flickr, the Facebook, these APIs were very public. And it took me a long time to realize that, and see APIs as stories, and then see these as very public performance. Storytelling out in the open takes a different level of bravery and different level of you got to have a common vocabulary, because you seem kind of you're the crazy guy down on Market Street in San Francisco. If you just get up there, start ranting, no one understands you. So you gotta like speak in a common vocabulary. But I've seen a lot of pushback in the last couple of years that people, you know, pe- people are like, well, I'm glad we're finally now figuring out the whole API thing and the private API, and people realize the public API thing was a mistake. That you should do more internal and private storytelling. And I think there's some truth to that in the way that there's a lot of companies who tried doing public APIs and failed, and there's a lot of high profile ones like ESPN, and others they got talked into doing the public storytelling by Mastery or some other API management provider and said, hey, if you build it, they'll come and tell the story. And they very much weren't ready to tell that story at all. Like, because they hadn't even thought through the licensing of the words that they use in their storytelling. It wasn't their story, it's some other story. And I saw Financial Times did this as well. They still have some APIs, but they tried to be very public for a while, and then they kind of shrank that down because I think people aren't really ready to pull back the curtain on their org, and some people did it and they got burned by it. And so I think that the human aspect of this and teaching people to speak with APIs and tell their stories with APIs, tell a very corporate enterprise story, but then tell that publicly in a coherent way that doesn't get them in trouble. And I'm always getting in trouble for saying things too publicly and being too public, but I know it's really hard for some people. And so I just think it really shows how human all of this API is, and really kind of roots it in that storytelling is people just are either comfortable or not so comfortable, or ready or not so ready to do it.
Well, one thing that occurs to me listening to you, Ken, um, I'm almost, not that I lived during this time, but I'm almost like trying to imagine like the 1960s with like business process management and manila envelopes and pneumatic tubes between buildings in downtown Manhattan. And like, I wonder how much, obviously those aren't APIs, but I wonder how much of that human story is like the same. Like you make a request for a stock to be sold, you put it in a tube, it goes somewhere else. Someone, looks and asks someone else if you have that balance and puts a stamp on it and sends it off somewhere else. Like it's almost, I almost would say that we've taken whatever that human system was and we've automated a lot of pieces of it, but it's still like that human system under the hood. And I wonder if there's interesting learnings we could have by looking at it through that lens.
There's a lot to learn from the past, right?
Oh yeah, tons. All I know is mostly from that, whether it's my past or people who had passed before me and kind of hopefully wrote their stories down for me to try to learn from. It's there's a ton of stuff there, and really, the other hat that I wear is really enterprise architecture, and that's really where the systems and understanding of like how the different elements of that socio-technical system really work together, and that's where you start architecting and building those connections between those systems and understand, hey, is this
We're
actually the
recording
same?
this call for better note taking, follow up, and
Sorry.
training purposes.
There it is.
Sorry. This is what, sorry, 1 second. This is why I switched to the new system, is because one, I screwed up the recording last week. And so I wanted better recording, but it'll actually transcribe and keep notes. But it's like 10 minutes too late. So
It's 10
maybe
minutes
next
late.
time.
It's good.
Anyways, continue, Michael. I apologize.
Sure. And really it's a lot of those things that really is same place. It's the same flow. It's just elements of it's faster. And you kind of get to this part where, okay, sure, the elements are all fast, but the whole system is slow. When you sit here and you go, why is this system slow? We upgraded all the elements. Well, when you start talking about a system, now that's like the whole performance of everything. You have to optimize the system, not any of the individual elements. And that's where kind of being aware of your language and your vocabulary, right, can really help you optimize the system as a whole, because it can show you where your process is actually the thing that's holding up the game, instead of a technical element that you've got blazing fast. It really is a way to kind of optimize both elements of the system at the same time using APIs.
When you say it's a socio-technical system, are you talking about sort of the way it's architected and the fact that you're humans who are building this, or are you talking about actual components in the system that like a human has to go sign off on or do some data entry around, or is it a little bit of both?
Yep. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Yeah, kind of hinted at the meta conversation about your conversation, but it exposes where things are less optimal, right? There is no perfection, right? You can always just try to improve forever. And so when you're talking about this system, yeah, maybe the data entry is part of a holdup. Maybe you can look to remove some of that, but also maybe the way that you're trying to do governance in your system, right, could be the holdup, right? Maybe there's a different way to kind of do it. Metaphor I kind of like to use in that example is you know, a funnel versus a cone. It's the same geometric shape, right? But if you kind of take that cone, you flip it up, you know, the big side down, and you try to get, you know, something through there, it's going to be really hard because you got this small little hole at the top. But if the goal is to get something through that hole and you flip it over, you got this really big target you can kind of hit, and then kind of over time funnels down into, and all of a sudden it goes, you know, you go right through the target. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of look at stuff, and the conversations about, you know, the vocabulary, the languages that you use, right? The painful process of being explicit about what those words really mean, really kind of exposes the innate kind of tribal experience or experiential knowledge that people have in their systems, and it gives you all these new opportunities and insights.
So do you have a story about or an example of like coming into a team that didn't have that language and having to sort of bring it together from scratch? And I'm also curious, like, what along that journey of defining this stuff more rigorously, like what are the failure modes and what are the ways to like to do it better? What have you learned over time doing this?
I think uh do I have stories? Yeah, pretty much every conversation that I have in my consulting career was this in one fashion or another, because I use the APIs and these languages really as this conversation mechanism, right? It's this kind of bootstrapping way to kind of talk about the system. And it's the API, it's the vocabulary before the technical details like the HTTP, the endpoints, the URLs, all that. No, it's really, what are we talking about? What's this thing? I kind of gave a talk at I think this ResFest actually about the 3 questions I ask, and it's really, what thing is it? What are we trying to do, right? And whose responsibility is it? Those are like the 3 kind of big questions that I ask, and I use these API questions, right? And the API there is a way to refine and kind of create that vocabulary to kind of do it. And the biggest learning that I've kind of come out with this is that it's absolutely critical to kind of promote safety when you're having these conversations, right? And really kind of set the environment and the tone to know that, look, we're exploring together. You know, nobody here has the answer, you know, least of all me, because I'm usually the consultant who knows literally nothing about what's going on. And really, it's really just a kind of a guide, an exploratory process of going through and really understanding, taking everybody's input together and really putting it all together, and getting people to feel safe in that environment to share and open up, to tell their story, right? To tell their version is really how you going to put all that stuff together.
Do you feel people are equipped to share that and to are comfortable and equipped to explore and figure things out? And then do you think they're comfortable with telling their story, or or in your experience you have to like pull that out of them? I mean, I guess it's depending on the org you're working for, but what's your experience usually?
Yeah, definitely depending on the org you're working for, the culture of the organization would play a role in it. But you know, even smaller, the culture of the team, the individual people and their comfort level with sharing things. it really, a lot of different things come into play there, and that's why the biggest learning that I've kind of done, and the way I've learned to communicate better through going through this process myself is ensuring that really it's an exploratory process where everyone is safe, and every person has been different on what that is, right? But it really is kind of a snowball. As soon as you get one starting to share, then you get another, and then you get another, and then you get another, and then everybody's really being loud and energetic and excited, and it's this light switch where you just start to see that the whole group is really exploring things together. People have kind of joined a hive mind almost to really explore this and really put all their pieces together. And in those sessions, that's where the safety, if you have somebody that's making other people feel unsafe in that situation, or something is, you can really prevent that conversation. Then you get into that pulling teeth kind of situation you talked about.
Yeah, a thing that feels like something that takes away safety that I've seen in a lot of companies is just a draw to sort of reuse what's already been built sometimes, or the fear of making like a radical change to a big system. But I'm sure there's probably like, at least several more that are very common that make it feel a little less safe to be in that room. And I'm sure some of it's like personalities and things that aren't really general or shareable across teams. But are there other things that you feel like are like things that we sort of had to dispel and cast away for a moment if we're going to inquire about this stuff at a really good level?
Dispel, yes, definitely. One of the first things that I had to dispel when going through this was really the belief that safety was kind of this global thing, an entity that you kind of, once you had safety, you had safety. It's extremely contextual, and it's very fragile, and you can really, if you're careless about it, in some of my initial goes at doing things like this, I had been where I unintentionally kind of destroyed that flow, because the safety just got evaporated by one careless comment. I was with the flow, but I spoke poorly, and that kind of just took it away. And going through the things that that biggest part to dispel was really the fact that safety was kind of this universal thing. And one of the mechanisms that I learned to do this, a very self-deprecating kind of sense of humor, but I would generally kind of be the person, a little bit of the punching bag, and really kind of be vulnerable first, and kind of show that it's okay to be vulnerable. Things like, saying something, being wrong, and making a big deal about saying, oh, I'm not sorry, I'm totally wrong, I missed that, right? Kind of really being open to that, really, it gets the whole environment there. And really, actually, Mike's not here, but Mike and Ben at RestFest were ones that really helped me kind of put it together with the yes and then that was kind of one of some of the first couple. I would start with no but, and then I would say the same thing, right? But just that instantaneous butting heads, it really just changes the dynamics, right? People are wondering why you're working against them, or are we all working together? And really after that, yes, and like really build that up, build that steam, be vulnerable, be open, and say, look, we're all exploring something, and then that really makes the flow go.
Real quick, what's RestFest?
RestFest, okay. RestFest is I think hiatus this year, but it's a small unconference that was originally held, mostly held down in South Carolina.
Yeah, South Carolina.
Yeah, Greenville, South Carolina. There's one in Grand Rapids as well, and I think there was a couple attempts at some in Europe as well. It's a non-conference, so everybody kind of gets up and speaks and talks about APIs and learns and kind of shares their stories and really kind of helps grow. And it's a remarkable situation, very safe, very pretty much like this we're flowing, where a lot of people who are into the APIs kind of get together and talk about stuff and really kind of share and learn from each other's perspectives.
Yeah, I think it really reflects what we're trying to do here with API storytelling, and I mean it's Mike Amundsen, who's the other Mike that's usually here. He's one of the original organizers of it, and it's just it's a phenomenal event. I highly recommend it. So
likewise, I've been a few times and I've highly recommended it a bunch of times to a bunch of people. It's a great place it's a great environment, very safe environment to learn for people of all levels in it. It's not selly. It's really just a way to kind of go and learn something from people who are also trying to learn things about it, about APIs and REST. It's great.
I think you talked a lot about safety. I think we as white men in the space and coders and very comfortable banging our heads on things, we always kind of just assume, like, and like you were saying, that other people are going to want to do the same, and people shut down for various reasons and trust you or don't trust you for various reasons. And in the API space, people are pretty mean, and I'm always fascinated by how abrasive folks can be when it comes to sharing knowledge or not sharing knowledge, or making you feel welcome or not. And I've been very guilty of it several times, of just not realizing how loud I am, how passionate I get, really intense, and I can scare people off. There's things like that. But I mean, I started API Evangelist very much to try to make it accessible to folks, and I ebb and flow on how accessible or how successful I am in making APIs accessible to others. But that's still my mission, and I, similar to you, use that tactic of self-deprecation. I make lots of mistakes out in the open. I talk about things I don't understand. After 10 years of doing it, I share stories about, oh, I just figured this out. I didn't see that. I didn't understand how that worked. Or just so you can show people, tell a story and be honest about it, and then pull people out of that and get people into the game. So it's really a critical part of the storytelling process, is to make people feel comfortable, or at least want to listen and tune in.
Yeah, definitely. We got, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think it's really good to think about the earliest days of this storytelling and like the beginning of a new API or a new project or a new way of doing something, as a time when building that safety is the most important. I think it's really easy to have something finished and talk about it publicly. I think it's really hard to have something in that early phase and talk about it publicly, even if publicly is just like with your colleagues on a different team inside of a company even. But like sharing that stuff when it's so nascent, I think is really hard as like a default thing. But doing it helps frame, I think, all of our mindsets towards learning, and getting that feedback and seeking it by telling the stories like helps actually build the systems and do the sort of work at the end of the day better, because these storytellings and these perspectives of being open are part of it from the beginning.
Definitely. I'm kind of, going back to conversations I think you had either last week or the week before on here, and the stories that you heard and learned in the past, right? They come back around, and one of the funny things is that going through kind of the public schooling system, in my experience, right, it really kind of taught me that the right answer was kind of that, and being wrong was a bad thing. And one of the kind of the rewirings that I had to do to kind of get there, right, was to say, oh, being wrong is not a bad thing. That's an opportunity, right? And not to say that, but to truly believe, okay, cool, there's something more I can learn here, and actually really look at that as a positive, in some fashion, to be able to go and use it. And white guys in tech, we do have kind of the privilege to be able to kind of be the default in there, and let the passion out and be kind of careless almost in some ways in the way that we communicate, because we have that kind of the default privilege there. And one of the ways that this whole process has really helped me grow as a person, really is in understanding that, and incorporating that in the way I communicate, and kind of being able to widen that safety net where I can be innovative and exposed and vulnerable in public, saying I don't know the answer, right? We're recording this, right? I don't know all of these things. I'm still learning. There are things that I do know, but being able to say I don't know, and be comfortable with that, that kind of creates that flow in that environment. And those of us with the privilege to really have to kind of expand that space, so that more people can be kind of experiencing that freedom to be vulnerable in public, right? To have the privilege to be vulnerable in public, to learn and to perceive things in this way.
Yeah, I think that's definitely our biggest challenge, is how do we create that space that's possible. I think it's easy for us to sit here and in our own space and talk about it, but I think that's our challenge moving forward, is how do we keep making that space and bringing people to the table. So
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's definitely one of the things. And Ken, you're working at Postman, really helping to kind of build that out there. And your stories. I maybe came late to the game, and this environment was, the rest crowd has a reputation, let's say, and from the past, I really like being a part of flipping that story on its head. Yeah, sure, they have a reputation of really welcoming people and really going to do this. Like, let's flip that on its head, and let's really change that framing. Oh, that's interesting.
sorry about that. Keep talking. I'll figure it out.
So that's what I like being a part of. Like, I consumed so many of your, well, before we met, and I felt obligated to start sharing what I had learned and put together, and start speaking. I devoured RestFest videos, right? I devoured your posts and so many other conference talks that were out there. And then I ran out of the good ones. I couldn't find new recordings anymore of talks that were out there to hear. And I started reading the specs and all this stuff. And then I started putting all of this together, and I felt like I had to kind of participate and be there. I felt kind of responsible to kind of start sharing. And it started out as a technical thing, but it's really kind of morphed into, well, there was a process and a freedom that I had in kind of exploring this, and able to kind of grow myself through going here. And it's a bit of a kind of a pay it forward kind of thing. I like the conversation you had about, there's no such thing as the self-made, person. And, I'm not self-made. I used the resources that I was able to find out there myself, but I was taught by lots of experts and lots of people. I looked at your work, Ken, and I'm like, yeah, there's some really compelling stories here that I can integrate here. And I looked at other people like Steve Klabnik and others who were really kind of in the earlier days at RestFest, and their work, and I was like, there's some really compelling stories here that I can learn from. And I feel almost responsible to kind of pay that forward and really kind of make more people able to kind of have that opportunity to grow as people, right, and professionals. Sure.
I'm hearing every team should host their own RestFest. Like, doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are. Like, these kinds of forums where we get to talk openly about all of these things and create that space, like almost regardless of APIs, like what we're describing here is like how humans design and choose to do anything together. And it's cool that that's, the thing we've all come around together are APIs, but this is so like broad, and in terms of all the strategies you've talked about today are things I could see, doing with a group of people designing a new wing of a school. Like, the same kinds of practices would put us in the right frame of mind and create the right kind of space for all those constituents to come together and decide what's best. So that's like the thing I love about technology, is like, if you peel back even a single layer, it's all people. It's not that, like, it's not deep at all. It's, you get back to the people problems and the people opportunities and the ideas, you know, it's like opening up a yogurt. Like it's the thin film on the top and everything else is people.
Yeah, everything else is people.
Yeah, this isn't Soylent Green. I'm not saying that we eat people. I'm not advocating that.
So it looks like, so just process here. So I stopped using my Camtasia because the video of me was all screwed up the last week. So I'm like, oh, I'll just use Zoom, and it'll record from the right perspective, and for some reason it's telling me it'll only record 30 minutes and I have to upgrade, but we're on a paid account, so I don't understand what's going on. But anyways, in about 5 minutes I'm going to ask us to pause, and I'm going to keep recording with Camtasia and I'll stitch it together, so we'll be fine. But anyways, that's where we're at. So back to the creating of the space. I'm always fascinated by what I'm fascinated by what brought you in. I mean, both of you I met in the space just kind of came up to me. You're very outward going personalities. You're
Really?
both very smart. You kind of made yourself known, I would say, in similar ways in front of me, because I'm always, I see so many and I meet so many people, like who stands out and then who sticks, and then who ends up becoming elevates themselves to a storyteller position and maintains in the space for various reasons. I would say, Aiden, you're very startup focused, where Michael's always been he was always consulting and but I'm curious why the public performance of it for either of you, because I know my reason. I mean, there's a little bit of ego dripped in there and we talked about it before, but why the public performance of it? Is it just to share with other people? Is it self, does it enrich you in some way? Why?
You want to take this first, Aiden, or
I'd be happy to.
go for it?
I think it comes from a few things, but by and large, I've always wanted to solve like a really hard problem. That's always been important to me. Not to say that I solved a hard problem, but because solving a big problem means that it's helped a lot of people. In the area I've always enjoyed working with are developer tools. I mean, I've been doing that basically my entire life, is building dev tools. And I love it because when you make something that helps people make things, you have so much leverage. It's like a hammer. Like the person who makes the hammer has also built all the houses. Not directly, and you never get accredited for it, but like it's really cool to know that like things exist because of tools that you made. And I guess for me, part of trying to solve the problems in the API space that I've observed and that people have told me about is, the putting out stories and doing these like low fidelity dives and understanding what stories are out there today, how they're affecting the ways that we try to solve the problems, and then also which of them might need to be revisited. And my storytelling is like a very active process of trying to learn and seeing like, what about this 5 paragraphs do people index towards? What do they disagree with? And ultimately, like that has helped me make the things that I'm building better from that kind of engagement. It's almost like giving people enough to imagine so that they're able to get to that next place and talk about it in a different way. So I think there's definitely a self-serving aspect in there because it helps me learn very quickly. But at the same time, the idea is that those learnings are then turned around and help the people who helped me. So that's probably why I do it. And then also I do stand up, and the world is shut down and Zoom stand up isn't as fun. So getting on any kind of stage, whether it is text-based or voice-based, is enjoyable.
Do you have to sit down while you're doing the Zoom? So can we still call it stand up?
I do usually stand up. I have a bar and I do drop comedy. So I have like props that I can pull up now. So yeah, it's gotten more creative over time, but I do try to stand up when I do it.
Nice. It sounded like, I got to kind of piggyback a little bit on a couple of points that you brought out. It's fulfilling, right? And you get a lot out of it, right? I kind of heard those kind of two themes, and you get to help a lot of other people. Like the helping other people is fulfilling. I gotta those kind of retouch on that in a second, but I gotta say first off, Ken, I'm flattered that you think that I'm an outgoing kind of person, because that's not really. I'm very introverted. And I guess maybe what you didn't see is when Harry Potter went back to in Portland, his hotel room is the endless fussing over the slides and practicing of the talks that I was about to give at API Strat. Over it, because this is decidedly well outside of my comfort zone, and certainly something I felt compelled to do to kind of give back. I think it was kindergarten. I was asked, what's my dream job when I'm going to be in a career. It's just one of the stories that my parents constantly retold me. But I said I was going to be a professional baseball player, and in the off season I was going to be a chef in a homeless shelter. Right, like that's what I was going to do in kindergarten. I'm an optimist, and I have a very and it's I was privileged to be able to be brought up that way, and to have that optimism kind of protected for so long before cynicism set in. But there's a fairness of it, right? And being able to help people, and having the ability to help people, I kind of feel like it's kind of a bit of responsibility to kind of help people. If I can and I don't, right, then I'm a bit culpable. And so that's kind of really what got me off the bench. But what's really kept me here is that it's kind of some of the things that Aiden was touching on. It's definitely fulfilling to kind of feel responsible. Yeah, that's about where I was. So I feel kind of a little bit culpable and responsible to kind of give back, right? To kind of share my story, right? To kind of put things together in a different way to maybe help, put that next rung on the ladder and pull a few people up with me because of all of the good that I've gotten out of it. And there's certainly, an ego element. It feels great to help people and to teach, which was one of the biggest things that I was surprised by, is that I really enjoy teaching people these things that I've learned and sharing it. That wasn't who, previous to coming out into this world I had been. And it's sure there's some ego in there as well. It's fun once you get over the anxiety and the terrifyingness of being up in front of all these people, sharing new ideas and insights, or being vulnerable. Once you get over all of that, it's really a lot of it's just been a great way to grow as a person. Like I've developed professionally, and I'm proud of that, right? But I also feel like I've become a better person because of the things that I've learned, and then kind of looked at myself and be introspective of things with new learnings, new lenses, right? And kind of continuously finding ways to make myself better. So it's just been scary, sure. Not my natural surroundings, sure. But it's been an environment that's been really great for me personally. And I like to believe and that I'm helping a few people in the process, and that makes me feel good too.
So I want to clarify one point when you first started talking into this section. He said what you didn't see in Portland is when Harry Potter went back to his hotel room. So I want to clarify this. So API Strat in Portland was at Halloween, and he was dressed as Harry Potter. So just a little expansion of the story there, because most people were dressed up, and it was it was 2017. So I think that wasn't the last. That was the second to the last API strategy in practice before it became the API specification conference. It is now run by the Open API initiative. So that was a good time, or the final one's a good time. Go ahead, Aiden.
I was just to say one thing you said, Mike, which I think is worth like calling out, because there's so many practitioners out there who are doing things like this. I've gotten like in the past, like this sense that there's like broader community that's like, oh, like the things in tech don't matter. They don't necessarily like make the world better. And I think like on the macro level, like making an API better is not necessarily going to change the world in like a really high leverage way, but I think it can. And I think some of them do. And I also think that for each individual human who's like on a team where they have that option to be vulnerable and talk about what really matters and drive towards building something better than what they had before, like that's super rewarding for individuals. And even if it doesn't like make the entire world a better place, like creating environments like what we've been talking about for a lot of this episode on individual teams makes the lives of all of those people a lot better. And I think that like shouldn't be understated, that like that is an important contribution that these kinds of practices can have on individuals, and like that extends to their home life and their family life and everything else that they do, like, and creating these workspaces where we can all come together and like do good work, I think is something that is good for society. And there's like that, there is that second order effect that like I try not to focus on too much, but like I know it's there, and I don't want it to go unspoken that that's a part of it.
Yeah, I think that nurturing aspect of storytelling and I mean, listening to stories, having people kind of lead and be storytellers and kind of capture your imagination, but then you feeling like you have space and you have agency to do that and learn to express and share your, whether it's within a team in a large enterprise org. I mean, where some of us feel very isolated and alone quite often. So being able to just do that from that position, let alone publicly, I think it can definitely be empowering and make it so that people makes my life much more tenable to be able to like voice myself and talk about what things and it helps me deal with anxiety and other things. But I love hearing how it just enriches and allows people to go home and kind of enjoy what they do, because some of us has some pretty mundane aspects of our job. We'll just leave it at that. So um I want to take a few minutes before we close up, because listening to you guys talk, I'm going to keep trying to. So I have a vision in my head, and I mentioned it last time, and I consider what Aiden does, his startup Optic, is being StoryCore. And we talked about last week real quick about, Mike mentioned, the other Mike mentioned StoryCore and how they gather these stories from people to give them a space to tell their story. And so I see Optic as very much StoryCore. I said that, and I keep thinking about it. It's one of those things I see and I know, but I can't coherently articulate yet. And I have a lot of those types of ideas in my head. And so I'm going to keep trying to articulate until I land home. And so everything we just talked about with storytelling and Mike, what you're talking about with your consultancy and going around getting people to share their part of the process, their part of what they do, how they see it, all of that for me, when I look at, the different teams that I go around into enterprise organizations and have these conversations with, all of it collectively gets recorded into the API. It's codified into the API. And how well or how poorly we did our job means, and that's reflected in the design of the API, the parameters. If the parameter is called off 3 set 5, like what, what, it's abbreviated, and you, the person who wrote it, knows that you didn't communicate that, you didn't go talk to the other team, go, hey, what should that property be, what would make the most sense. And so these stories happening, this communication, this collaboration, what environment exists, gets codified. And think of it as like, record early days of making records down on a wax, put in the
Sarah
grooves.
tablet.
Yeah. And so like these stories all collectively go down and become this versioned history of our world. And why I keep saying that, because when I mentioned it before, is I went around F5 Networks, a company, and I was given 2,500 objects and said, these are the objects that are used to configure Big IP, which is it's like their data center product. It's how you define a data center and operation. So I have 2,500 objects. design a new API from this, with like just the schema objects. So I had XSDs and I created JSON schema, and then I wanted to know more about what the API should be. And I went around and interviewed people. Why does this object exist? Why does this parameter exist? And I realized these were the geologic layers, or the record little ruts that got laid down over the last 20 years. And why I see Optic as StoryCorps, because it's very much like allows us to play that back from the exhaust that exists across the organization. And then it kind of it tells you the story in a way that you have to kind of listen. And whether it's the current version, the last version, 5 versions ago, playing that back and being able to see as much of what was going on at that point in time, what went into this and what went wrong. Why did we change that property that caused that breaking change? Why did we name it like this, or why did they? And I think these are the different ways of playing stories forward and backwards, capturing it based upon the moments that happen, recording it, and then playing back and interpreting that recording. There's many ways that this happened, but it's very much that the APIs are very much a kind of geological history and of this narrative. I think that we're going around to our organization, through these organizations and doing, and I'm fascinated by capturing that history, because it's not just the API, the design of the API, it's the documentation, it's the portal. I have the portal for the Twitter API, the field guide. So there used to be documentation it looked like an Audubon field guide, because Twitter tweets. So the documentation actually looked like the field guide. And I have that. It's no longer up. Those docs are gone. That version of the API is gone. But I have that snapshot and I have it saved. And so it always reminds me these StoryCorps, like, why do we do StoryCorps? Because we want to capture these voices and learn from the past. So bringing it back home, that's my current attempt at describing Optic and how that is, and just us trying to learn from these stories that get laid down when we're not. I think we're all still isolated and not sharing the story. So across an organization, how do you gather and vacuum all this up and then play it for people, or let people listen to it so they can learn from it? How do I do this time, Aiden? Am I getting closer?
I had 5 interpretations of what your StoryCorps comment from last week could mean, and I was going to ask you again this week or the following week. But yeah, I think that's something that Dev Doshi, my co-founder, in the very early days when we were first experimenting in the space, I was like, we'll just do this on Open API and have one version, because that's what is there today, and it'll be faster to build. And Dev, his superpower is that he can see 100 miles down the road in a way that I can't. And he was like, no, the thing that's going to be important to the space and to really solve change management is to be able to talk about things over time. And we just think of Optic as APIs over time. We don't say that out loud to people because it's not really the thing that they're currently looking for. But it means a lot that you see that. And some of the stuff that we have coming up soon are like putting the users' faces next to the things that they changed and seeing who changed this last, like get blamed before your API. So all these things, and I remember blame. I like that. Safe space. Get understand or lineage or something. That's a good point, Mike. So I think what I was going to say is, I think the first time we talked, you picked up on that really early, Ken, and validated that for us, and kept us on that path. And I know we've said thank you to you for so many other things, but that was something that we thought was the coolest thing ever. Most people didn't understand was the coolest thing ever. And that first day you met us at API World, we're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And that just, it was one of those tiny little nudges that imparted momentum.
Good. Glad to hear.
I feel like I don't know if we're running out of time, but I got to ask you a question, because you said something that was really, really intriguing in there. You talked about kind of the language and how the enterprise is kind of changing over time, and you're looking at this topological kind of map of really the organization, the enterprise as a whole. in a lot of ways, we started this all off in the beginning talking about language and vocabulary, right? So if you take some of the technical bits out of it, you got your vocabulary, and you're looking at basically the ubiquitous language, and borrow from DDD, right? You're looking at the language and observability, and one of the unintentional lateral knowledge kind of things that I put together was learning a lot from Charity Majors, Honeycomb CTO, about observability and looking at the systems observability, and seeing in a lot of ways, really, it's really about observability of your language and the organization structure changing over time. And that's really awesome. And what I kind of was curious about, right, going through that process, you said you started about 2,500, objects that you were given. Did you discover a lot of overlap, right? Did you discover a lot of things that maybe from a DDD perspective would look like maybe the same thing, but a different person's or group's perspective of that thing?
Oh yeah. I mean, so diving in, and so just to clarify, DDD, domain driven design, is and acronyms is another part of my storytelling that I struggle with. So I'm always unpacking. I worked in government a lot. So I went around and interviewing people, and I won't name names, but there was one gentleman who had been there the longest, and everyone was kind of afraid of him. And I found ways of kind of cornering him and getting him to answer questions. I'm like, okay. And I gave him, I would do it in person, and then I gave him a form that he could do it without me there. But it was like TV show flicking through the channels, each object. And I only gave him a small subset because I knew there's different domains of the network, this application. So I focused on the ones I knew he knew about. And I walked him through the first couple and then let him do it and gave him commenting abilities on each property and the overall. So he could comment on the overall object or each individual property. And he would kind of rant when I was there. And then in his own space, he even ranted even more. And he'd be like, oh yeah, this was goddamn Bob. Bob came over from that one team that was acquired, and he just felt, IP masking needed to be like this. And so Bob would change these things and do this. And then he had just endless stories, and they were all cross-domain stories. Joey came over from that one group, and he just didn't really understand NatSec, and he just, and he would just, and it reminded me of StoryCorps very much, because it was like the crotchety or old uncle, curmudgeon old uncle, like this goddamn, and he, it was great. Like, and I was like, man, I would really like to have this story laid down in this. And, it turns out the, Big IP has a reputation for breaking changes, and to the point where I think they're on version 17 or 18, and very few people move past 12, version 12, because of this. And I mean, we're talking massive installations. These are $1 million contracts, and they're data centers. So if you do one upgrade and it breaks, you're probably not going to do a second one.
Once, right?
Yeah. So it was very, very interesting. And I think just as far, like, there's so much loss in this. And I learned this from my wife, who, is a folklorist. And like, what ends up remaining is part of history. When you're trying to assess these historical conversations, there's only so much record that gets captured, and what gets laid down in those record tracks or those geological layers. And and you mentioned it, Michael, if people don't tell their story, you don't hear it, and you hear the ones that manage to get written down. So how do we, acknowledging that everyone's busy and run around with their heads cut off in the enterprise, how do we make sure as much of this gets captured, churned back up, and fed back to us using Optic-like services? So
yeah, the last idea I'll leave you guys with is something that Dev talks a lot about, which is like the work of programmers is to learn the domain, and the domain is always changing, and then the code is always catching up to that. Like we're constantly discovering this new vocabulary, what parts of our existing vocabulary is wrong. And this isn't just like something that happens at F5. This happens everywhere. Like we're all constantly learning things, and so many of our breaking changes and things that we don't feel like are right in our current systems is just not because we did it wrong, but because the domain has changed a few times.
Mhm.
And it's hard to know what you can throw out if you don't know why it's there and how you got to where you were. And I think you need this whole context, and that's why the storytelling is such a huge part of it. And yeah, I'm flattered that you think that we are the StoryCorps, and we will try to live up to that.
Well, let's keep fleshing it out. I think it's one that I know I need to keep working on how I talk about. So with that said, we are a little bit over, and I want to be respectful of your guys' days. But Michael, this is great. Thank you. One of the things I would love to, a challenge, or we challenge each other last week, is to bring folks like you to the table. Keep spreading the word. Definitely bring other folks to the table. But one, come back. I would love to have you come back and we can talk about other topics. Two, figure out ways of injecting ideas into, keep sharing your stories, even, via Twitter or email or the usual ways we stay in tune. And let's keep this kind of an internal and external conversation and see how we can keep stirring the pot. And, but thanks for being here today.
I mean, it's a pleasure. It was a great time speaking with you. It's been too long with this whole COVID thing. And yeah, I can't wait to keep hearing your stories, and I'm going to do my best to keep sharing the ones and trying to get other people to share theirs there. I'm just trying to get better at making places and environments safe so people will share. I don't think you need to try and motivate people. I think you just need to convince them it's safe enough to tell their story. I think people really want to tell their story and really want to be understood. And I look at it and say, well, so then why isn't it safe for these people to share their story if they're not sharing?
Yeah. I think that's important. That's important.
Yeah. I would love to come back. You guys are really onto something really interesting here. And it's, I'll do what I can to help, promote and get other people involved too. I really love what's going on.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Any
Thank
last
you for
words, Mike or Aiden? Excuse me.
I'll just say thanks for being our first outside guest and helping us figure out the format, and bringing in such a good story. Yeah, bringing in such a good story for us to start with. We'll be doing many more of these, and I'm looking forward to doing this in person at the next Rest Fest with you, and hopefully all getting whatever the next T-shirt looks like and wearing it together.
That'd be great. All right, that'd be awesome.
Thank you too. Have a good weekend.
Thank you both. Enjoy your weekends.
Cheers.
It's story time. Time to start the day.